The first masonry bit punched into my workshop wall before I reached the bucket truck. Red brick dust sprayed across my gravel drive, while 4 stadium-grade LED arrays hung above the HOA's new pickleball courts, their steel brackets already biting into a building I owned outright. Silver Pines president Carla Voss stood beside the contractor with a clipboard and told me the association had lighting access wherever the recreation field needed it. "Finish the installation," she said, without even looking at me. I photographed the truck, the brackets, the conduit, and the fresh holes, then asked the foreman for the stamped mounting detail. He stopped drilling. The sheet in his cab showed 2 freestanding poles on HOA land, not fixtures attached to my wall, and my address appeared nowhere in the approved scope. When Carla tried to wave him forward, he folded the plans and called his office. That should have ended the job. Instead, the lights came on that night through a cable tied into my exterior service, and my meter began spinning like a fan. What I found in the engineer's revision log explained who had ordered the shortcut and why the HOA had already prepared to send every dollar of it to me. My name is Nolan Pierce. I was 52, and I built custom furniture in that red brick workshop, the same building my father had raised 34 years earlier. I had left before sunrise to collect a shipment of walnut. When I returned shortly after 8, the bucket truck was parked beyond my gravel turnaround, and 2 sets of tire tracks crossed the grass beside the workshop. Nobody had called, emailed, or asked permission to enter. Luis Ortega, the project foreman, kept his crew on the ground after he examined the plan, but the electrical subcontractor had already run a cable to the weatherproof disconnect beside my service panel. Sometime after Luis left, someone followed a separate instruction and energized the fixtures for an evening test. The glare erased every shadow in my yard. It shone through the workshop windows, turned sawdust on the floor silver, and threw hard white bars across my kitchen ceiling. I watched the digital meter advance, recorded 60 seconds of it on my phone, then photographed the panel without opening it. I shut down the non-essential circuits feeding my workshop, but I did not touch their cable or fixtures. I wanted the installation preserved exactly as they had left it. At 8:17 p.m., I emailed Carla, the contractor, and the HOA management company. I listed the arrival time, truck number, 4 fixtures, wall penetrations, electrical connection, and the moment the lights came on. I demanded that no one return to my property and asked for the deeded authority, permit, stamped mounting detail, and every engineering revision supporting the work. Carla answered 11 minutes later. She called the installation an authorized recreational improvement under a recorded utility right. She also warned that interrupting power could make me responsible for contractor delays and the cost of restoring service. I read her message twice, then looked at the photograph of the sheet Luis had shown me. 2 poles were drawn deep inside Silver Pines. My wall was not marked at all. If Carla had a revision allowing 4 lights to be bolted to my building and powered through my meter, why had the foreman never seen it? By 7 the next morning, the fixtures were dark, but they still changed the shape of the place. Their black housings projected from the brick like industrial shelves, and the conduit ran down the wall to a gray junction box that had not been there the day before. I walked the perimeter with a tape measure and photographed each anchor point. The nearest bracket sat 14 feet west of the boundary I had always understood to separate my land from Silver Pines. That distance mattered because my property had never belonged to the association. My father bought the 9.6 acres when the land east of us was still pasture. He built the workshop 34 years ago, using salvaged red brick and heavy roof trusses he raised with 2 neighbors. Silver Pines arrived 13 years later, after a developer purchased the adjoining acreage and divided it into houses, a clubhouse, and the recreation field. Our deed was never added to its declaration, and we had never paid dues or voted in an HOA election. The workshop was more than a family landmark. It was where I earned my living. I stored kiln-dried walnut, cherry, and white oak in climate-controlled racks along the east wall. Changes in humidity could cup a tabletop before glue-up, and an unstable electrical supply could stop the dust collector or damage the control board on my finishing system. I had 3 commissioned pieces in progress, including a 12-foot walnut dining table that represented 6 weeks of work. I could not treat the wall or the power connection as a cosmetic disagreement. At 9:06 a.m., the management company delivered a formal notice signed by Carla. It stated that the lighting system was a common recreational improvement installed under a recorded utility easement. The notice demanded that I restore uninterrupted power, provide contractors with access for inspection, and accept responsibility for delay charges caused by my shutdown. It also said future electrical use and routine fixture maintenance could be allocated to the property providing the service. Carla attached 6 pages from an easement recorded when Silver Pines was developed. I retrieved the complete instrument from the title packet in my office. My father had agreed to one narrow accommodation, a 12-foot corridor along the southern edge of our acreage for underground stormwater drainage. The legal description followed the south fence before turning toward a retention basin. It did not cross the workshop, mention electricity, authorize recreational equipment, or grant general access to the rest of the property. The closest point of that drainage strip was roughly 120 feet from the wall Carla had claimed. I sent the deed, title policy, prior survey, easement, and my photographs to Owen Clark, the surveyor who had updated our boundary exhibit after my father died. He arrived that afternoon with a receiver, a tripod, and copies of the recorded plats. Owen recovered 2 monuments, checked them against the deed calls, and marked the relevant line with temporary stakes. The east face of my workshop stood 14 feet inside my property. The tire tracks from the bucket truck reached another 6 feet past that line. Even its working position had required the crew to enter my land. Owen made clear that his measurements located the recorded description on the ground. They did not decide Carla's legal theory. Still, nothing he found placed the wall inside the drainage corridor or on HOA property. He also photographed the fresh tire impressions beside each stake and measured the conduit route, creating a dated record of where the crew had crossed and worked. He prepared a signed boundary exhibit showing the workshop, service panel, truck tracks, easement strip, and recreation field. I attached that exhibit to a written rejection of Carla's demands. I told the association that power would remain off until a licensed professional confirmed the installation was safe and authorized. I again requested the permit, full electrical design, mounting calculations, revisions, and proof of my consent. Near sunset, the management company sent a 9-page project summary instead of the complete file. Page 7 was a reduced lighting plan. I enlarged it on my monitor and found 2 circular pole symbols inside the recreation field, connected by a dashed underground route to the clubhouse panel. A dimension placed the nearest pole 86 feet east of my workshop. There was no line running to my meter. There was no bracket drawn on my brick, and there were no 4 lights mounted to my wall. The title block on page 7 identified the engineering firm that had designed the Silver Pines recreation field. I called its office the next morning and asked for Dana Cho, the professional engineer whose seal appeared on the plan. I did not accuse her firm of anything. I sent the project summary, photographs of the 4 fixtures, Owen's boundary exhibit, and a close image of the conduit entering my service panel. Dana called back within an hour. She was 41, precise in the way she spoke, and immediately concerned that equipment carrying loads from her design had been attached to a structure her firm had never examined. She explained that the HOA was her client, so she could not simply release its private correspondence to me. But she could verify what her sealed drawings required, and she could investigate a possible misuse of her firm's work. We met beside the workshop that afternoon. Dana stood near Owen's temporary stakes and compared the wall installation with a full-size copy of her issued-for-construction plan. The approved system used 2 freestanding steel poles located 86 feet inside the recreation parcel. Each pole required an engineered concrete foundation. Shielded LED fixtures were aimed toward the courts, and underground conduit ran from both poles to a dedicated circuit in the HOA clubhouse. Nothing in that design touched my land. Dana examined the brackets through binoculars and photographed the anchor spacing. Her calculations had never evaluated my brick veneer, the wall framing behind it, vibration from the fixture arms, or the risk of water entering through the penetrations. Even if I had agreed to the installation, she said, a structural review and a properly sealed mounting design would have been required before drilling began. She opened the revision register on her tablet. The log documented changes to court striping, a drainage inlet, and the height of the perimeter fence. There was no revision replacing the poles, relocating the power source, or authorizing attachment to an existing building. The latest approved lighting sheet was the same one Luis had shown me from his truck. Dana reported the discrepancy to the permitting office, while I requested the complete electrical permit packet as the affected property owner. The packet arrived the following day. Its load schedule identified the HOA clubhouse as the source, listed a dedicated breaker in panel C, and showed buried conduit following the recreation field walkway. My address, meter, workshop, and service equipment appeared nowhere in the application. One page near the back was different. It was a grainy photocopy labeled Field Mounting Detail. The sketch showed 4 fixtures attached to a generic masonry wall and carried Dana's company logo in the corner. It had no engineering seal, no date, and no property address. Its detail number looked similar to those on the approved plan, but when Dana checked the firm's index, that number did not exist. "We did not create or approve this," she told me. That sentence did not prove who had made the sketch, but it removed the only appearance of engineering support for the wall installation. Dana preserved a copy and notified both the HOA and the permitting office that the page was not part of her sealed design. I then downloaded interval data from my utility account. My workshop followed a predictable pattern: a small overnight baseload, a morning rise when I started the dust collector and compressor, then almost nothing after I closed. On the installation night, the graph jumped at the exact minute the quartz lit up and stayed elevated until I shut down the workshop circuits. The next test produced the same signature. I saved the original files and screenshots rather than relying on handwritten estimates. By then, I knew I needed someone who could organize the records without turning the dispute into a shouting match. Rachel Kim, a property attorney recommended by my title agent, reviewed the deed, easement, survey exhibit, stamped lighting plan, permit packet, utility data, photographs, and Carla's notices. She warned me not to unbolt the fixtures or cut the unauthorized cable myself. The equipment belonged to the HOA, and removing it without a documented process could create a new fight over damage or safety. Rachel sent a formal cease and desist and preservation letter. It demanded that the system remain de-energized, barred further entry without permission, requested every revision and contractor communication, and proposed a supervised removal plan. She also placed the HOA on notice for wall damage, power use, and business interruption. Carla rejected the proposal that evening. Silver Pines, she wrote, would reactivate the lights for its weekend tournament, and any interference would be added to the bill already assigned to me. The tournament began in 4 days. The crew returned Saturday morning, 2 hours before the tournament. A utility van stopped beside my workshop, followed by Carla's SUV and a security vehicle hired for the event. The electrician opened the exterior disconnect and began fitting a timer into the enclosure. No one had answered Rachel's letter, and no one asked to enter. I walked outside with my phone recording and told them they did not have permission to work on my property. Carla held up a copy of the drainage easement as though the paper settled everything. She said the tournament schedule had been published, vendors had been paid, and more than 100 residents expected safe lighting after sunset. In her version of events, shutting down the fixtures was not an effort to protect my wall or electrical service. It was interference with an HOA project. I did not touch the electrician or his tools. I repeated that the easement described underground drainage, 120 feet away, and asked the crew to wait while I called the non-emergency number. Carla told the electrician to continue. The deputy who arrived listened to both sides, viewed Owen's stakes, and read the first page of Rachel's letter. He explained that he could document the entry and keep the confrontation from escalating, but he could not determine the scope of an easement or decide who owned a civil property right. He recorded the names, photographed the vehicles, and gave me an incident number. When he asked whether the crew would leave voluntarily, the electrician packed his tools. The timer had already been connected, and the fixtures came on automatically that evening. For 6 hours, my property looked like a loading yard. The light-washed color from the brick struck the polished surface of the walnut table through the windows and made it impossible to judge stain samples under the shop lamps. The extra load appeared on my utility graph exactly as it had during the earlier tests. I saved the data and closed the workshop before the final matches ended. On Monday, Silver Pines distributed a message saying an adjacent owner had attempted to disable safety equipment before a community event. It did not mention that the equipment was bolted to my wall or connected to my meter. Several residents sent angry emails to my business address. Others drove slowly past the workshop, looking toward the lights as though they expected to see me cutting cables. The practical damage became harder to ignore after a night of heavy rain. Water darkened the mortar below the upper brackets and appeared behind an interior storage rack. When I moved the walnut boards, I found damp insulation and moisture along the back edge of several planks. I separated the affected stock, set up dehumidifiers, and postponed work on the dining table rather than trap moisture beneath its finish. A building envelope contractor inspected the wall the following morning. The anchors had penetrated the brick veneer and weather barrier without approved flashing. 2 bricks were fractured near the upper bracket, and water could follow the fasteners into the wall cavity. He documented every opening, took moisture readings, and recommended that the fixtures be removed under controlled conditions before repairs began. Covering the holes from the outside would not address damage already hidden behind the brick. Rachel added his report, my material inventory, utility records, and lost production days to our evidence file. Then Luis Ortega responded to the preservation letter. His signed statement confirmed that his crew had arrived with the approved freestanding pole plan. Carla had directed them to use my workshop after they reached the site. Luis stopped the masonry work when I asked for the mounting detail, but the electrical subcontractor received a separate instruction to complete the connection and test the lights. That account explained the split I had seen on the first day. It also pointed Rachel toward the contractor's change order records. The contractor produced a partial project file, rather than risk being drawn deeper into the dispute. One approved change order deleted the 2 engineered pole foundations, rock excavation, underground trenching, and the feeder from the clubhouse. The credit to Silver Pines was $28,400. In their place, a single line instructed the contractor to use an existing adjacent structure and service. It did not identify my workshop, attach owner consent, or include a revised sealed drawing. The signature accepting the change belonged to Carla. Rachel sent the document to the full HOA board with a final demand for de-energization, supervised removal, and payment of my documented losses. Martin Shaw, the board treasurer, replied that he had approved the original lighting budget but had never been shown a request to attach fixtures to private property. He asked the management company for the board vote authorizing the substitution. No vote appeared in the materials produced. Carla answered through the HOA's attorney. She maintained that the drainage easement carried enough incidental access to support the installation, and argued that the change had saved association funds. Silver Pines would not remove anything without a court order. It also reserved the right to seek tournament expenses and contractor delay charges from me. Rachel gave them one final deadline. It expired at 5 on Wednesday afternoon. At 5:12, she filed the complaint. Rachel's complaint did not ask a judge to punish Carla or decide the case overnight. It asked for a declaration defining the drainage easement, damages for the entry and wall penetrations, reimbursement for unauthorized electrical use, and an injunction preventing Silver Pines from using my property without consent. With it, she filed a request for temporary relief, supported by Owen's boundary exhibit, Dana's initial declaration, the permit packet, the building envelope report, and my utility records. The HOA responded that the wall installation was a reasonable field adjustment made for safety. Its attorney argued that the drainage easement included incidental access for common utilities and that the fixtures benefited both the courts and my property by improving nighttime visibility. They also claimed removing power before the dispute was resolved would expose the association to contractor costs and canceled events. At the temporary hearing, Rachel kept the issue narrow. She did not ask the court to order immediate demolition. She asked that the fixtures remain in place but de-energized, that neither side alter the evidence, and that HOA contractors stay off my land while the recorded rights were reviewed. Dana explained that the sealed design used freestanding poles and that her firm had never evaluated the workshop wall. The HOA could not produce a sealed wall mount revision or a permit naming my service. The judge said the final scope of the easement required a developed record. Until then, Silver Pines could not draw electricity through my meter or enter the property to operate the system. I was ordered not to remove or damage the fixtures. The temporary order did not declare me the winner, but that evening, for the first time since the tournament, my yard remained dark. Discovery began the following week. Rachel requested board minutes, project approvals, engineering revisions, invoices, emails, text messages, permit submissions, and every communication with the contractor. She also subpoenaed records directly from the lighting contractor and electrical subcontractor, so the HOA could not define the file by itself. The first production from Silver Pines contained hundreds of pages, but very little explanation. The board minutes approved the original recreation field project, including 2 freestanding poles and a dedicated clubhouse circuit. Later minutes discussed rising construction costs, but none recorded a vote to use my building. Carla had signed the $28,400 change order under authority to administer the approved budget. The HOA argued that this gave her discretion to choose an equivalent installation method. The contractor's production showed something more specific. 3 days before the crew arrived, a project manager warned that changing from poles to a private structure required owner permission, revised structural details, and an electrical permit amendment. Carla replied from her HOA account, "Use the Pierce wall and existing service. We can address the ownership issue after commissioning. The tournament date cannot move." The email copied the management company and the electrical subcontractor. Attached to it was the unsealed field mounting sketch carrying Dana's company logo. In her deposition, Dana compared that attachment with her firm's drawing index and document metadata. The border and logo had been copied from an older standard detail, but the fixture arrangement and non-existent detail number were not part of her work. She would not call it a forgery without knowing who assembled it. She could say, under oath, that it was not an engineering document issued by her firm. Luis gave the same account he had provided in his statement. His crew expected to install poles. Carla directed them to the workshop after arrival, and he stopped drilling once I challenged the work and showed him the conflict in the plan. The electrical subcontractor's daily report recorded a later instruction from HOA President CV to complete the connection and conduct a nighttime test. Martin Shaw produced the board packet he had received before voting on the project. It contained the pole design, clubhouse feeder, and original budget. It contained no wall mount option. 2 other directors confirmed that Carla never brought the substitution back for a vote. Their concern was not only the lawsuit. By deleting the poles, Carla had changed the engineered location, the power source, the maintenance burden, and the property being used while presenting the decision as routine cost control. The board stopped speaking with one voice. Martin requested an internal review. Another director asked the association's attorney to explore removal rather than defend the installation indefinitely. Carla continued to insist that the easement and her budget authority protected the decision. The most important record arrived from Dana's firm near the end of discovery. The morning after the first test, Dana had issued a field observation to Carla, the management company, and the contractor. It stated that the wall installation deviated from the sealed design, lacked structural review, used an unapproved electrical source, and should be de-energized pending an approved correction. A delivery receipt showed Carla had opened the message. She had received that warning before the tournament crew returned, before the timer was installed, and before the HOA told residents I was interfering with safety equipment. Rachel added the field observation to our mediation statement. She arranged the evidence in order: the deed, the narrow easement, the survey, the approved poles, the permit, the change order, Carla's email, the contractor reports, and Dana's warning. Each record supported the next one. Mediation was set for the following Tuesday. By then, the question was no longer whether someone had made an innocent mistake in the field. The question was how much Silver Pines would pay to correct a decision its president had been warned not to continue. Mediation began in a conference room with no jury box, no audience, and no dramatic ruling waiting at the end of the day. The mediator explained that he could not force a settlement. If we failed, the temporary order would remain in place while the case moved toward trial. The 4 fixtures would stay bolted to my workshop, dark but still exposed to rain, and both sides would continue paying lawyers and experts. Carla sat across from me with the HOA's attorney and 2 directors, including Martin. Rachel and I had 1 binder for ownership records, 1 for engineering documents, and 1 for damages. Dana and Owen were available by phone if technical questions arose. Silver Pines presented its argument first. The association had a recorded right to enter a portion of my land for common infrastructure. The lighting served a legitimate safety purpose. Carla had authority to manage the approved construction budget, and the use of an existing wall was described as a cost-saving field adjustment rather than a new project. Their attorney suggested that the lights improved security around my workshop and that any trespass was technical and temporary. It was a coherent argument until the mediator asked them to identify the document that connected those points. The easement described a 12-foot underground drainage corridor along the southern boundary. Owen's exhibit placed that corridor approximately 120 feet from the workshop. The wall itself stood 14 feet inside my property, and the bucket truck had crossed another 6 feet beyond the line. Nothing in the recorded language mentioned lighting, recreational equipment, electricity, or access to the rest of the acreage. Rachel moved next to the engineering record. Dana's sealed plan required 2 freestanding poles located 86 feet inside HOA land. The poles had engineered foundations, shielded fixtures, buried conduit, and a dedicated circuit from panel C in the clubhouse. The electrical permit matched that design. The revision register did not replace it. The wall sketch had no seal, no valid detail number, and no verified author. Then came the records showing intent. The contractor had warned that a private structure required owner permission, a structural design, and a permit amendment. Carla's reply directed the team to use my wall and existing service and address ownership after commissioning. Luis stopped drilling when the plan conflict became visible. The electrical report showed a later order from Carla to energize the system. Dana's field observation warned Carla to de-energize it before the tournament crew returned. The original decision could be described as rushed. Continuing after those warnings could not. Martin asked to see the delivery receipt for Dana's field observation. Rachel slid it across the table. The timestamp showed the message had been opened from Carla's account. He compared it with the resident announcement issued 2 days later, the one accusing me of interfering with approved safety equipment. For several seconds, no one spoke. Carla finally said she had relied on the management company and believed the engineering concerns could be corrected after the event. The HOA attorney did not repeat that explanation when the mediator separated the parties into different rooms. Our damages were not based on a round number or a punishment demand. The building envelope contractor priced removal access, matching brick, weather barrier repair, flashing correction, and interior moisture work at $19,800. A licensed electrician priced disconnection, removal of the unauthorized equipment, repair of my service, and code verification at $8,950. Utility records supported $2,340 for power used during tests, tournament operation, and later lighting periods. Owen's survey, Dana's review, title work, and related professional expenses totaled $6,550. Damaged material and documented workshop interruption totaled $7,000. Rachel proposed an $8,000 contribution toward legal fees as part of a negotiated resolution. Together, the demand was $52,640. Silver Pines first offered to remove the lights and waive the charges it had threatened against me. Rachel reminded the mediator that an association could not create value by withdrawing bills unsupported by the deed, permit, or contract. Their second offer included wall repair, but it allowed the same contractor to choose the method and required me to release future claims before the brick cavity was opened. The mediator returned with questions about the cost of continuing. A trial would require engineering testimony, survey testimony, electrical analysis, additional destructive testing of the wall, and a decision on permanent relief. Even if the HOA reduced the damage award, It could spend more defending the shortcut than the original poles would have cost. The temporary order also prevented the association from using the fixtures while the case remained pending. We rejected both offers. By late afternoon, Martin and the other director asked to negotiate without Carla in the room. They were not admitting every allegation, but they understood the financial direction of the case. Defending the installation would require them to explain why the approved poles were deleted, why my consent was never obtained, why a non-engineered sketch carried Dana's logo, and why the system was reactivated after her written warning. The final terms took another 3 hours. Silver Pines agreed to remove all 4 fixtures, brackets, conduit, timer equipment, and connections within 10 days. The removal had to be supervised by licensed electrical and building envelope contractors. The wall would be opened where necessary, photographed, repaired with matching brick and mortar, and inspected before the interior rack was reinstalled. The HOA agreed to pay the full $52,640 within 30 days. It also agreed that any future court lighting would use the original freestanding pole locations and the clubhouse electrical service unless a new sealed design and permit approved another option entirely on HOA property. Most important to me, the settlement would be entered as a consent judgment. Its permanent injunction prohibited Silver Pines, its officers, managers, and contractors from entering my land, attaching equipment to my structures, or using my utilities without written permission. The drainage easement remained valid for its actual purpose, so the HOA could still maintain the underground stormwater line within the described southern corridor after proper notice. Nothing broader was created. Carla signed for the association after the board representatives authorized the agreement. I signed after Rachel checked the payment schedule, repair standard, inspection rights, and enforcement language one final time. There was no applause. The mediator collected the signature pages, and I carried the binders back to my truck. The wall was still damaged, and the lights were still there. But for the first time, every responsibility was written beside the party that had created it. The engineering records had not erased the bill. They had shifted it to Silver Pines. 10 days later, a lift rolled up my gravel drive beneath a gray morning sky. This time, it had come to take the stadium lights down. The removal crew began by isolating the unauthorized circuit and documenting the service panel before touching the wall. The lift rose slowly to the upper brackets, and one by one, the 4 black fixtures came down. Without them, the workshop looked strangely bare. Pale rectangles marked the brick where the steel plates had blocked months of sun, and each anchor left a dark opening rimmed with red dust. The building envelope contractor removed damaged bricks around the worst penetrations and opened a narrow section of the interior wall. Dana's concern had been justified. Water had followed 2 upper fasteners through the torn weather barrier, dampening insulation and staining the wood sheathing. The framing remained sound, but covering the exterior holes alone would never have stopped the hidden moisture. Over the next week, the contractor replaced the damaged barrier, installed proper flashing where repairs required it, dried the cavity, and reset matching salvaged bricks with mortar blended to the original color. A licensed electrician removed the added timer, junction box, and cable, restored my service configuration, and completed a final inspection. The restoration company photographed every layer before closing the wall, exactly as the consent judgment required. When I moved the walnut rack back into place, there was no conduit above it and no damp smell behind the boards. My meter returned to its ordinary evening pattern. For the first time since the installation, I could shut off the workshop and know that nothing outside was still drawing power through it. Silver Pines eventually built the 2 freestanding poles from Dana's original design. They stood 86 feet inside the recreation field, fed by underground conduit from Panel C in the clubhouse. Their shields directed the light onto the courts instead of through my windows, and a programmed cutoff turned them off at a reasonable hour. The solution the HOA had avoided was the solution the approved records had specified from the beginning. The board completed its internal review after the consent judgment was entered. It formally censured Carla for changing the engineered design without owner permission, failing to obtain a board vote, and continuing the installation after receiving Dana's warning. Carla resigned as president. Martin Shaw became interim president and sent me a brief written apology that did not excuse the association's conduct or ask me to surrender any part of the injunction. Silver Pines paid the full $52,640 before the 30-day deadline. The money covered the restoration, electrical correction, power use, professional expenses, damaged material, business interruption, and the agreed contribution toward legal fees. I signed the completion acknowledgement only after Rachel reviewed the inspections and confirmed that every obligation had been performed. For once, no portion of that bill was left beside my name. The 12-foot drainage easement remained where it had always been, along the southern boundary. If the HOA ever needed to maintain that line, it would provide notice and stay inside the recorded corridor. The permanent injunction protected everything beyond it. I finished the 12-foot walnut dining table 2 weeks after reopening the workshop. As I applied the final coat, late sunlight crossed the east wall without the hard white glare that had once filled the room. The repaired bricks were visible if I knew where to look, but the wall was dry, quiet, and mine again. The first drill bit had made the conflict feel immediate and personal. What ended it was less dramatic. Photographs, a deed, a survey, sealed plans, utility data, and people willing to place each fact in the right order. Carla had treated my workshop as the cheapest place to put 4 lights. The records showed why the cheapest shortcut became Silver Pine's responsibility.